Sarah Mitchell's hand shook as she slipped the small jar of baby formula into her worn jacket pocket. The bright lights of the grocery store seemed to spotlight her guilt, even though no one was watching. Her 3-month-old son Tommy had been crying for hours at home, and she had run out of formula 2 days ago. The young mother had tried everything. She had applied for food assistance, but the waiting list was months long. She had asked her neighbors, but they were struggling too. Her job at the diner barely covered rent, and after paying for utilities and her son's medical bills, there was nothing left for food. Tommy had been born premature and needed special formula that cost twice as much as regular milk. Sarah walked toward the exit, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. She had never stolen anything in her life. She was raised in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and her grandmother had taught her to always do the right thing. But watching her baby cry from hunger was breaking her heart, and she didn't know what else to do. The security guard by the door looked at her casually, and Sarah tried to smile and walk normally. Just as she reached for the door handle, a firm hand grabbed her shoulder. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," the security guard said loudly. Sarah's world collapsed. Other shoppers turned to stare as the guard led her to a small office at the back of the store. The manager, a stern-faced man in his 50s, was waiting with his arms crossed. The security guard pulled the formula from her jacket and placed it on the desk. "This is the 3rd theft this week," the manager said angrily. "I'm calling the police," Sarah began to cry. "Please, I can explain. My baby is hungry and I don't have any money. I've never done this before, I swear." The manager shook his head. "I've heard every excuse in the book. Stealing is stealing." Within 20 minutes, 2 police officers arrived. Sarah tried to explain her situation, but they had heard similar stories before. She was arrested and taken to the county jail. The charges were petty theft, but because she had no money for bail, she would have to wait in jail until her court date in 2 weeks. Sarah's neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, had agreed to watch Tommy while Sarah went to the store. When Sarah didn't return that evening, Mrs. Peterson called the police and learned what had happened. The elderly woman did her best to care for the baby, but she was on a fixed income and couldn't afford the expensive formula Tommy needed. In jail, Sarah couldn't sleep. She worried constantly about her son. Was he getting enough to eat? Was he crying for her? She had no family nearby, and Mrs. Peterson was kind but already struggling to care for her own needs. The other women in jail tried to comfort her. Many of them were mothers too, and they understood her desperation. They shared their own stories of trying to provide for their children when they had nothing. Some had been arrested for similar reasons, others for different crimes born from poverty and desperation. On her 3rd day in jail, Sarah was told she had a visitor. She expected it to be Mrs. Peterson with news about Tommy, but instead she found herself face to face with a man she had never seen before. He was tall and weathered, with long gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind eyes that seemed to see right through her. "My name is Joseph Crowfeather," he said, in a gentle voice. "I'm a chief of the Lakota people, and I heard about your situation." Sarah was confused. "I don't understand. How do you know about me?" Joseph smiled softly. "Word travels fast in small communities. Mrs. Peterson is friends with my daughter, and she told us about your situation. About a mother trying to feed her child." Sarah felt fresh tears coming. She was embarrassed that strangers knew about her shame. But there was something comforting about this man's presence. "In our culture," Joseph continued, "we believe that when someone is truly in need, the community must help. What you did was wrong in the eyes of the law, but I understand why you did it. A mother's instinct to feed her child is sacred." "I don't know what to do," Sarah whispered. "I don't have money for a lawyer, and Tommy needs me. Mrs. Peterson is trying to help, but she can't afford his formula." Joseph leaned forward. "I want to help you, but first you need to understand something. This path you're on, the path of desperation and shame, it doesn't have to be your story. There are people who care about you and your son, even if you don't know it yet." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw genuine kindness. "Why would you want to help me? You don't even know me." "In our traditions, we don't help people because we know them," Joseph explained. "We help because it's the right thing to do. Because every child deserves to eat and every mother deserves support when she's struggling." He stood up to leave. "I'm going to make some calls. You won't be in here much longer. But when you get out, you need to be ready to accept help and to start rebuilding your life the right way." After Joseph left, Sarah sat in her cell thinking about his words. She had been so focused on her immediate problems that she hadn't thought about the future. She had been surviving day by day but not really living. For the first time since Tommy was born, she felt a small spark of hope. That night, she slept better than she had in weeks. She dreamed of her son laughing and playing, healthy and happy. She dreamed of a future where she didn't have to choose between paying rent and buying food. She dreamed of a community that cared about her and Tommy. Sarah didn't know that Joseph had already begun making phone calls. He had contacted a lawyer who did pro bono work, a local church that provided emergency assistance to families, and several community organizations that helped single mothers. He had also arranged for someone to deliver proper formula to Mrs. Peterson for Tommy. The next morning, Sarah was told she had another visitor. This time it was a young woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Maria Santos, a public defender. Maria Santos had kind eyes behind her glasses and spoke with confidence that immediately made Sarah feel better. She sat across from Sarah in the small visiting room and opened a thick folder. "Joseph Crowfeather called me yesterday," Maria began. "He told me about your situation and I want to help you. I specialize in cases like yours where good people make desperate choices." Sarah felt overwhelmed. "I can't afford a lawyer. I can barely afford anything." Maria smiled. "That's why I'm here. I do this work for free because I believe everyone deserves proper legal representation. Now tell me everything that happened." Sarah told her story again, this time including details about Tommy's premature birth, the medical bills, her struggles to find work that paid enough, and the failed attempts to get government assistance. Maria listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions that helped Sarah remember important details. "The first thing we need to do is get you out of here," Maria said. "I've already spoken to the judge about reducing your bail to something manageable. Joseph has arranged for a local church to post bail for you." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Strangers are helping me? Why?" "Because that's what communities do when they're working properly," Maria explained. "You've been isolated and struggling alone. But there are people who care about families like yours. Joseph has connected you to a network of support you didn't know existed." Within hours, Sarah was released from jail. Mrs. Peterson was waiting outside with Tommy in her arms. Sarah rushed to hold her son, tears streaming down her face. He looked healthy and content, and Mrs. Peterson explained that someone had delivered formula and diapers the day before. "There's more," Mrs. Peterson said with a smile. "People have been calling all day wanting to help. The church wants to meet with you tomorrow, and someone from the community center called about job opportunities." Sarah held Tommy close and felt the warmth of his small body against her chest. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe things could get better. The next morning, Maria picked up Sarah and Tommy and drove them to the Lakota Cultural Center where Joseph worked. The building was simple but welcoming, with beautiful artwork on the walls depicting scenes from Native American history and culture. Joseph greeted them at the door and led them to a comfortable room where several other people were waiting. There was Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church, Mrs. Chen, who ran a child care center, and Dr. Martinez, who worked at the community health clinic. "We wanted to meet you properly," Joseph said, as they all sat in a circle, "and to talk about how we can help you build a stable life for you and Tommy." Pastor Williams spoke first. "Our church has an emergency assistance fund for families in crisis. We can help with your immediate needs like food, utilities, and rent for the next few months while you get back on your feet." Mrs. Chen leaned forward. "I run a child care center, and we have a program for single mothers. We provide free child care while you work or go to school, and we specialize in caring for babies with special needs like Tommy." Dr. Martinez smiled at the baby. "I've reviewed Tommy's medical records that you signed permission for. He's doing well, but he needs regular checkups. Our clinic provides services on a sliding fee scale based on your income." Sarah felt overwhelmed by their kindness. "I don't understand why you're all helping me. I'm a criminal now. I was arrested for stealing." Joseph shook his head. "In our culture, we have a saying, a person is not defined by their worst moment but by what they do after it. You made a mistake because you were desperate to care for your child. That doesn't make you a bad person. But how can I ever repay all of you?" Sarah asked. By accepting the help, Pastor Williams said simply. And someday, when you're in a position to help someone else, you pay it forward. Maria opened her briefer. Now let's talk about your legal situation. I've been reviewing your case and I believe we can work out a plea agreement that won't result in jail time. You'll probably have to do community service and pay restitution to the store. I want to pay them back, Sarah said quickly. Even if it takes years, I want to make it right. Joseph nodded approvingly. That's the spirit we hope to see. Taking responsibility while accepting help shows wisdom. Over the next few hours, they developed a plan for Sarah's future. Mrs. Chen offered her a part-time job at the child care center, where she could bring Tommy with her. Pastor Williams would help with housing by connecting her to a program that provided affordable apartments for single mothers. Dr. Martinez would monitor Tommy's health and development. Maria explained that the court date was still 2 weeks away, but she was confident they could work out an agreement that would allow Sarah to move forward with her life. As the meeting ended, Joseph walked Sarah and Tommy outside. The sun was shining and Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. There's something else I want to show you, Joseph said, leading them to a garden behind the cultural center. It was full of vegetables and herbs, carefully tended and thriving. We grow food here for families in need, Joseph explained. But more importantly, we teach people to grow their own food. Would you be interested in learning? Sarah looked at the healthy plants and imagined being able to provide fresh vegetables for Tommy when he was old enough to eat them. Yes, I would love that. Joseph handed her a small packet of seeds. These are for you to start with. Plant them when you're ready and remember that everything takes time to grow. Your new life is like these seeds. With the right care and patience, beautiful things will bloom. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment with Tommy sleeping peacefully in his crib. She had enough formula to last a week, food in her refrigerator that the church had provided, and for the first time since Tommy was born, she wasn't worried about tomorrow. She thought about the kindness of strangers who had become friends in a single day. She thought about Joseph's words about not being defined by her worst moment. She thought about the seeds in her pocket and the new life they represented. Sarah picked up a pen and paper and began writing thank you notes to everyone who had helped her. She wanted them to know that their kindness had given her more than just material help. It had given her hope. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in the courthouse wearing a clean dress that Pastor Williams' wife had given her. Tommy slept peacefully in his carrier, and Maria stood beside her as they faced the judge. Sarah's hands trembled as she thought about what might happen. The store manager was there too, still looking angry about the theft. Sarah had written him a letter of apology, but she didn't know if he had read it. She wanted to face him and apologize in person, but Maria had advised her to wait until after the hearing. Judge Rebecca Foster was known for being fair but firm. She had reviewed Sarah's case file and all the letters of support that Joseph and the others had submitted. She looked at Sarah with serious but not unkind eyes. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Foster began, you've been charged with petty theft. How do you plead? Guilty, Your Honor, Sarah said clearly. She had decided to take full responsibility for her actions. The prosecutor recommended community service and restitution, which matched what Maria had negotiated. But before the judge made her decision, she asked Sarah to speak. I want to say that I'm deeply sorry for what I did, Sarah began, her voice getting stronger as she continued. I know stealing is wrong no matter what the reason. I was desperate to feed my son, but that doesn't excuse my actions. I've learned that there were people willing to help me if I had just asked for help instead of trying to handle everything alone. She looked toward the store manager. I especially want to apologize to you, sir. I know my actions caused problems for you and your staff. I plan to pay back every penny, and I hope someday you can forgive me. The store manager, Mr. Rodriguez, looked surprised. He had expected Sarah to make excuses, not take full responsibility. His expression softened slightly. Judge Foster nodded approvingly. Ms. Mitchell, I can see that you understand the seriousness of your actions. I'm sentencing you to 200 hours of community service to be completed over the next year, and you must pay restitution of $50 to the store. However, I'm also ordering that you participate in the community support program that has been arranged for you. Sarah felt relief wash over her. No jail time meant she could stay with Tommy and work toward building their future. After the hearing, Sarah approached Mr. Rodriguez in the hallway. Sir, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to thank you. He looked confused. Thank me? For having you arrested? For doing your job, Sarah said sincerely. If you hadn't stopped me, I might have kept making bad choices. Being arrested was awful, but it led me to people who genuinely wanted to help. In a strange way, you saved my life. Mr. Rodriguez studied her face. You really mean that, don't you? Yes, sir. And I promise you'll get your money back with interest if possible. He was quiet for a moment. You know, I have a daughter about your age. If she was struggling with a baby and no help, I'd hope someone would show her mercy while still holding her accountable. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Mr. Rodriguez reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. I own 3 stores. If you're serious about making changes, come see me in 6 months. I might have work for someone who's learned from their mistakes. Sarah took the card with shaking hands. Thank you. I won't let you down. Over the following months, Sarah threw herself into rebuilding her life. She worked at Mrs. Chen's childcare center during the day, bringing Tommy with her. In the evenings, she did her community service at the food bank, helping distribute meals to other struggling families. Joseph became like a grandfather to Tommy and a mentor to Sarah. He taught her about Lakota traditions of community support and shared responsibility. He showed her how his people had survived difficult times by helping each other and never giving up hope. In our culture, Joseph explained one day as they worked in the garden, we have a concept called mitakuye oyasin, which means all my relations. It reminds us that we're all connected, and what affects one person affects the whole community. Sarah was learning to grow vegetables and herbs. She found the work peaceful and rewarding. Watching seeds become healthy plants reminded her of her own growth and change. Dr. Martinez monitored Tommy's development regularly. The baby was thriving with proper nutrition and medical care. He was reaching all his milestones and had grown into a happy, healthy child who smiled at everyone he met. Pastor Williams helped Sarah apply for a small apartment in a safe neighborhood with other single mothers. The rent was based on her income, and there was a playground where Tommy could play as he grew older. But the most significant change in Sarah was her confidence. She no longer felt ashamed of asking for help when she needed it. She had learned that accepting assistance wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. She also discovered that she had skills and strengths she never knew she possessed. At the child care center, Mrs. Chen noticed that Sarah had a natural talent for working with children, especially babies with special needs. She encouraged Sarah to consider taking classes in early childhood development. You have a gift, Mrs. Chen told her one day. The babies respond to you in a special way. Have you ever thought about making this your career? Sarah had been focused on just surviving day by day, but now she began to think about her future professionally. I never finished high school, she admitted. I got pregnant with Tommy when I was 17 and dropped out. That doesn't mean it's too late, Mrs. Chen said. There are programs for single mothers to get their GED and even go to college. With your experience and natural ability, you could become a specialist in caring for premature babies. The idea excited Sarah more than she expected. She had always felt like she wasn't smart enough for school, but working with the babies made her realize she had valuable instincts and abilities. That evening, she called Maria to ask about educational programs for single mothers. Maria was delighted to help research options and even offered to help with applications. Joseph was proud when Sarah told him about her educational goals. This is what healing looks like, he said. You're not just surviving anymore. You're beginning to thrive. 6 months after her court date, Sarah had completed half of her community service hours and had saved enough money to make her first restitution payment to Mr. Rodriguez's store. She decided it was time to take him up on his offer to discuss possible employment. She dressed carefully in her best clothes and brought Tommy with her. Since Mrs. Chen had encouraged her to show Mr. Rodriguez how well she was doing as a mother, Sarah walked into Mr. Rodriguez's store with Tommy in his stroller, her heart beating fast but her head held high. She had changed so much in 6 months that she almost felt like a different person. The store looked the same, but she saw it differently now. Instead of feeling shame, she felt grateful for the lesson this place had taught her. Mr. Rodriguez was behind the customer service counter and looked up when he saw her approaching. His stern expression from months ago had been replaced by curiosity and something that looked like respect. Ms. Mitchell, he said, walking around the counter. You look well. And this must be Tommy. Sarah smiled as Tommy giggled and reached toward Mr. Rodriguez. He's doing wonderfully thanks to all the help we've received. I wanted to give you this first. She handed him an envelope containing $50 and a detailed letter explaining how she had earned the money and her plan to pay any remaining balance. Mr. Rodriguez opened it and read the letter carefully. Didn't have to write all this, he said, but his tone suggested he was impressed that she had. Yes, I did, Sarah replied. I wanted you to know that I take my responsibility seriously. I also wanted to thank you again for giving me a chance to prove that I've changed. Mr. Rodriguez invited her to his office, where they could talk privately while Tommy played with a toy Sarah had brought. The office was small and cluttered with paperwork, but clean and organized. Tell me what you've been doing these past months, he said, settling into his chair. Sarah told him about her work at the child care center, her community service at the food bank, her plans to get her GED and study early childhood development. She spoke about the garden where she was learning to grow food and the community of people who had supported her journey. Mr. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he was quiet for several moments. I'll be honest with you, he finally said. When I had you arrested, I thought you were just another person looking for an easy way out. I've been robbed many times over the years, and most people make excuses and never take real responsibility. He leaned forward in his chair. But you're different. You've done something I've rarely seen. You've actually changed your life instead of just saying you would. Sarah felt a warm glow of pride, but also humility. I had a lot of help. Joseph Crowfeather and his community taught me that accepting help isn't shameful. It's how people are supposed to live, supporting each other. This Joseph sounds like a remarkable man, Mr. Rodriguez said. I'd like to meet him sometime. He'd like that, Sarah smiled. He believes in building bridges between different communities. Mr. Rodriguez opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder. I've been thinking about what kind of position might suit someone with your experience. I know you're working at the child care center, and I don't want to interfere with that, but I have an idea. He explained that he was considering opening a small cafe inside one of his stores, a place where working parents could grab coffee and fresh food while shopping. He needed someone who understood the needs of families, especially single parents. The hours would be flexible, and you could bring Tommy with you when necessary, he said. It would pay better than most retail jobs, and if the cafe succeeds, there would be opportunities for advancement. Sarah was stunned. She had hoped for maybe a part-time cashier position, not an opportunity to help create something new. But I don't have any restaurant experience, she said hesitantly. You have something more valuable, Mr. Rodriguez replied. You understand what your customers need because you've been where they are. You know what it's like to be tired, stressed, and trying to take care of a family on a tight budget. They talked for another hour about the details. The cafe would start small, offering simple items like sandwiches, salads, and coffee. Sarah would work with an experienced chef to learn food preparation and safety requirements. She could continue her other job while the cafe was being set up and gradually transition to more hours as it grew. There's one condition, Mr. Rodriguez said as their meeting ended. I want you to continue your education. The cafe will pay for your GED classes and any additional training you need. Sarah felt tears building up. Why are you being so generous? I stole from you. Mr. Rodriguez smiled, and for the first time Sarah saw real warmth in his eyes. Because Joseph Crowfeather called me last week. Sarah looked surprised. He did? He told me about the Lakota concept of restorative justice, where the goal isn't punishment but healing the harm and making the community stronger. He said that giving you a real opportunity would restore more than just taking money from you. Sarah understood then that Joseph's wisdom and influence extended far beyond what she had realized. He hadn't just helped her. He had been quietly working to change hearts and minds throughout the community. He also told me something else. Mr. Rodriguez continued. He said that in his culture, when someone helps a person in need, they're not just helping that individual. They're helping all the future people that person will help. He called it planting seeds for 7 generations. That evening, Sarah took Tommy to the cultural center to find Joseph. She found him in the garden, as usual, tending to the plants that had grown so much since she had first seen them. I heard you had a good meeting today, Joseph said with a knowing smile before she could speak. You called him, didn't you? Sarah said, though she wasn't upset. She was amazed by his continued kindness. I planted a seed, Joseph said simply. But you're the one who made it grow by proving yourself worthy of trust. Sarah sat on a bench nearby while Tommy crawled around on a blanket, exploring grass and leaves with wonder. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. Joseph sat beside her. Do you remember what I told you about Mitakuye Oyasin? All my relations? You don't owe me anything because we're family now. Tommy is my great-grandson in spirit and you're my daughter. Sarah felt the truth of his words deep in her heart. Over the past months, this community had become her real family. They had seen her at her worst and helped her become her best. I want to learn more about your culture, she said. I want Tommy to grow up understanding these values of community and mutual support. Joseph's eyes lit up with joy. That would honor us greatly. There are stories to share, traditions to learn, and wisdom to pass on. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in beautiful colors, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate woman making terrible choices. Now she was surrounded by love, opportunity, and hope for the future. Tommy crawled over to Joseph and pulled himself up to stand, holding onto the old man's legs. Joseph laughed and gently lifted the baby into his arms. This little one will grow up knowing he belongs to a community. Joseph said softly, he'll never have to face the world alone like you did. 1 year after her arrest, Sarah stood in the same courthouse, but this time she was there as a volunteer. She had completed all her community service hours and paid back her restitution, but she continued working at the food bank because she loved helping other families in crisis. Today, she was accompanying another young mother who had been caught shoplifting diapers for her newborn. The woman, Lisa, was scared and alone just as Sarah had been. But unlike Sarah's experience, Lisa now had an advocate who understood exactly what she was going through. It's going to be okay, Sarah whispered to Lisa as they waited for her case to be called. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but this can be the beginning of something better for you and your baby. Lisa looked at Sarah with desperate eyes. How can you say that? I'm going to lose my daughter. They'll take her away because I'm a criminal. Sarah remembered feeling the same terror. That's not going to happen. I'm going to make sure you get the help you need. There are people in this community who care about mothers like us. Judge Foster called Lisa's case, and Sarah watched as Maria Santos, who had become a close friend, stood to represent the young woman. The same prosecutor was there, and even Mr. Rodriguez had come to observe, as he often did when Sarah was involved in helping someone. The hearing went much like Sarah's had, with Maria negotiating for community service and restitution. But this time, there was an established support system ready to help. Pastor Williams was there to offer assistance from the church. Mrs. Chen was ready to provide child care. Dr. Martinez would ensure the baby received proper medical care. Most importantly, Joseph Crow Feather sat in the back of the courtroom, his presence a reminder that the community stood behind Lisa, just as they had stood behind Sarah. When the hearing ended with Lisa receiving probation and community service, Sarah hugged the crying woman. Now the real work begins, she said gently. But you won't do it alone. Over the following months, Sarah became Lisa's mentor, just as Joseph had mentored her. She helped Lisa navigate the support services, taught her about asking for help without shame, and showed her that mistakes didn't define a person's worth. The cafe in Mr. Rodriguez's store had opened 6 months earlier and was thriving beyond everyone's expectations. Sarah had discovered she had a talent for creating healthy, affordable meals that busy families loved. More importantly, she had turned the cafe into a community gathering place where single parents could connect with each other and find support. She had earned her GED with honors and was now taking online classes in business management and early childhood development. Tommy, now walking and talking, spent his days at Mrs. Chen's childcare center, where he was surrounded by love and learning. But the most significant development was that Sarah had become a bridge between different communities in the town. The cafe regularly hosted events that brought together people from the Lakota Cultural Center, various churches, the Hispanic community, and other groups that had never interacted before. Joseph was proud of how Sarah had embraced the concept of Mitakuye Oyasin. She understood that her healing was connected to the healing of the whole community. You've become a teacher, Joseph told her one day as they worked together in the garden, which had expanded to provide fresh vegetables for both the food bank and the cafe. You're teaching people that everyone deserves a second chance. and that helping others helps ourselves. Sarah smiled as she watched Tommy playing with some other children whose parents were volunteering at the garden. I learned from the best teacher, she said. The town had begun to change in noticeable ways. The arrest rate for petty theft had dropped significantly, as more people learned about available resources before they reached the point of desperation. The food bank had more volunteers and donations than ever before. Local businesses had started hiring people with criminal records. Following Mr. Rodriguez's example, Sarah's story had spread throughout the region, and she was sometimes invited to speak at conferences about criminal justice reform and community support programs. She always brought Joseph with her, insisting that his wisdom about restorative justice was the foundation of her transformation. During one such speaking engagement at a social work conference, a woman in the audience asked Sarah what she thought was the key to helping people change their lives. The key is believing that people are more than their worst moments, Sarah answered. Everyone needs someone to see their potential, not just their problems. Joseph Crowfeather saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and that changed everything. She paused and looked out at the audience of social workers, judges, and community leaders. But it's also about understanding that individual problems often have community solutions. I didn't just need food for my baby. I needed a whole support system, job training, childcare, healthcare, and people who believed in me. No one agency could provide all of that, but a connected community could. After the conference, several attendees approached Sarah about replicating the support network model in their own communities. She always referred them to Joseph, knowing that his wisdom about building bridges between different groups was essential to making such programs work. Back home, Sarah continued mentoring other young mothers who had made desperate choices. Lisa had become her success story, earning her own GED and now working as an assistant at the child care center. But there was always another scared young woman who needed guidance and hope. One evening, as Sarah was closing the cafe, she found a note slipped under the door. It was from a teenage mother asking for help, too ashamed to ask in person. Sarah smiled, remembering how terrified she had been to accept help when it was first offered. She took out her phone and called Joseph. "I have another one," she said simply. "Good," Joseph replied. The circle continues to grow. Sarah looked around the cafe that had become so much more than a business. The walls were decorated with photos of all the families who had been helped through their support network. There were pictures from community events, children's artwork, and thank you notes from people whose lives had been changed. In the center of it all was a framed quote from Joseph. "Healing happens in community. We are all responsible for each other's well-being." As she turned off the lights and headed home to Tommy, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this place. She had started as someone who felt completely alone in the world, and now she was at the center of a web of relationships that supported dozens of families. She thought about the scared young woman who had written the note, and she felt excited rather than burdened by the prospect of helping someone else find their way. 5 years after her arrest, Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium of the state capitol building, addressing a room full of lawmakers about criminal justice reform. Tommy, now a bright 5-year-old, sat in the front row next to Joseph Crowfeather, both of them beaming with pride. "Honorable senators and representatives," Sarah began, her voice steady and confident. 5 years ago, I was arrested for stealing baby formula. I was a desperate mother who thought I had no other choice. Today, I stand before you as living proof that people can change when communities choose healing over punishment." The room was silent as Sarah told her story, explaining how Joseph's intervention had connected her to resources that transformed not just her life, but the lives of dozens of other families. She spoke about the cafe that had become a community hub, the mentorship program that had helped over 50 mothers avoid the criminal justice system entirely, and the restorative justice model that was being replicated in towns across 3 states. "The question isn't whether people deserve second chances," Sarah continued. "The question is whether we're brave enough to build communities that make those second chances possible." After her speech, several legislators approached her with questions about funding and implementing similar programs in their districts. Sarah listened carefully to their concerns and suggestions, but she always directed them back to the fundamental principle Joseph had taught her. Real change happens when communities take responsibility for all their members. Following the Capitol event, Sarah drove back to her hometown with Tommy chattering excitedly about seeing the big building and all the important people. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah marveled at how much their life had changed. Their small house was modest but comfortable, with a garden in the backyard where Tommy loved to help plant vegetables. The walls were covered with his artwork, photos of their extended chosen family, and certificates from Sarah's completed college courses in social work and business administration. Sarah had graduated with honors from the community college and was now pursuing a bachelor's degree online while managing the cafe and her mentoring work. Mr. Rodriguez had made her a full partner in the business, recognizing that her vision had made it far more successful than either of them had imagined. That evening, the whole community gathered for their monthly potluck dinner at the cultural center. It had become a tradition that brought together people from all backgrounds to share food, stories, and support for one another. Lisa, the young mother Sarah had mentored, arrived with her daughter and her new husband, a kind man who had embraced both of them as his family. Pastor Williams brought his famous cornbread, while Mrs. Chen contributed homemade spring rolls. Dr. Martinez came with his guitar, ready to lead the group in songs that had become their unofficial anthems of hope and community. Joseph sat at the head of the long table, now in his 70s but still vibrant and wise. He looked around at the faces gathered there, people of different races, ages, and backgrounds who had become genuinely connected through their shared commitment to supporting one another. "Before we eat," Joseph said, "I want to share something. 5 years ago, a young mother made a desperate choice that brought her to our attention. Some people would have seen only her mistake, but we chose to see her potential." He looked at Sarah with grandfatherly affection. "Sarah has taught us something important about leadership. True leaders aren't those who have never fallen. True leaders are those who have fallen, been lifted up, and now dedicate themselves to lifting others." Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she looked around the table at faces that had become her family. Tommy was playing with the other children, secure in the knowledge that he belonged to a community that would always support him. After dinner, as people began to clean up and say their goodbyes, Mr. Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside. "I have something to tell you," he said with excitement in his voice. "I've been talking with some investors about franchising our cafe model. They want to open locations in 10 cities, with you as the director of community outreach." Sarah was stunned. The opportunity would mean financial security beyond anything she had ever imagined, and the chance to spread their model of community support to thousands more families. "There's one condition," Mr. Rodriguez continued. "Joseph would have to be willing to travel and train the communities in restorative justice principles. The investors understand that his wisdom is essential to making this work." Sarah looked across the room at Joseph, who was telling stories to a group of fascinated children. "Let me talk to him," she said, "but I think he'll say yes. This is exactly the kind of seed planting he loves." Later that evening, after Tommy had fallen asleep, Sarah sat on her back porch thinking about the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos from the past 5 years, pictures of families they had helped, graduations they had celebrated, children who had grown up in their supportive community. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria, who was now a judge herself and still a close friend. "Saw your speech on the news. I'm so proud of how far you've come. Tommy is lucky to have you as his mom." Sarah smiled and texted back, "We're all lucky to have found each other." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the cafe early to find a young woman waiting outside with a baby in her arms. The woman looked exhausted and desperate, her clothes wrinkled and her eyes red from crying. "Are you Sarah?" the woman asked hesitantly. "Someone at the food bank said you might be able to help me. I did something stupid yesterday and I don't know what to do." Sarah's heart filled with compassion and purpose. "Of course I can help," she said, unlocking the cafe door. "Come in and let's talk. And bring the baby. I have everything we need to take care of both of you while we figure this out." As the young woman followed her inside, Sarah thought about the circle of healing that Joseph had taught her about. This scared mother would become someone who helped the next scared mother, and the community would grow stronger with each person who chose healing over shame. She put her arm around the woman's shoulders and said the words that Joseph had said to her 5 years ago. "You are not defined by your worst moment. You are defined by what you do next." Outside, the sun was rising over the small town that had become a model for communities across the country. In the distance, Sarah could see Joseph's garden, where new seeds were planted each season, growing into nourishment for anyone who needed it. The story that had begun with a desperate theft had become a story of redemption, community, and hope. And like all the best stories, it had no real ending, only the promise that the circle of healing would continue to grow, touching lives that hadn't even been born yet, for 7 generations and beyond.